3D printing today, show number 427. Lightweight extruder feeders. Prusa XL Posts on Facebook. Questioning design quality.
Welcome back to 3D Printing Today, the podcast about all aspects of 3D printing. Hobby, professional, industrial, it does not matter. We cover it all. My name's Andy Cohen, and I'm here with Mr. Whitney Potter.
How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing pretty good. So let's see. Interesting stories. Let's do the one on the British Museum. Now, we talked a lot about Scan the World on this podcast. So if you listen to this podcast, you know our position. Right away, you know that we feel it's best that all classic sculptures should be digitally scanned at the highest resolution and made available for the world.
Well, sure. I would say any sculpture that you do not have a living artist or immediate family of the artist that holds a copyright to, why not make that part of the cultural commons?
Right. And we're in agreement. And so when we saw this article, I immediately was like, what? So according to this article, which we got out of 3D printing industry, the British Museum was asked, actually, this has been going on for a very long time. The people of Greece want their statues from the Parthenon returned. Mm-hmm. Now, these statues were purchased a long time ago, more than 100 years ago, by some British Earl guy who came in and bought them from someone who just felt that he could sell them inappropriately. And this British guy took it back to England, the 7th Earl of Elgin. 200 years ago, this happened. And it was sold to him by Turkish occupiers. Ooh. And so they took these marble statues and put them on display in the British Museum. And in the 200 years since they did that, these statues have become quite famous. Mm-hmm. The Elgin Marbles, I think they're called.
Yes.
So somebody, let's see, who was it? Was it the Scan the World folks who did this?
It's the Institute of Digital Archaeology, which I'm not familiar with them, but they sound good.
It sure does. And they came to now remember, the Greeks have been saying, give us back our statues ever since they were stolen.
Right.
And so this isn't a new thing. This has been going on for a very long time. And these folks from this group have come forward and said, hey, look, we've got a great idea. Let us scan the statues, very high resolution, and then we can reproduce the statues in marble with CNC-controlled chisels and CNC-controlled tools, along with some manual labor. We can make exact duplicates in marble of these statues, and you can have those, but you got to send the originals back. And the British Museum said, no.
Well, it comes down to a lot about sort of the nature of what a museum is and what the authenticity of an artifact is. And I mean, you think about a simple example is the Mona Lisa, right?
Yeah.
You can buy reproductions of the Mona Lisa at, any gift shop in Paris, but yet a lot of people are still willing to, pay lots of money and stand in line for a brief glimpse of the real thing.
The real thing, which is kind of small and behind a lot of glass.
Right. And it's kind of, pointless to me, but yet authenticity is important to people.
Yeah.
And the British Museum is never going to display replicas of the Elgin marbles, because that's not what the museum exists for. The museum exists to display authentic artifacts.
Authentic stolen artifacts.
Everything in the British Museum is stolen.
And that should say something about the British Museum.
Well,
yeah.
it doesn't say about the British Museum. It talks about British colonialism and things that went on in the past and how we're dealing with that now.
And it doesn't sound like we're dealing with it very well.
Well, it's the British Museum is in a difficult place because probably the vast majority of their collection could be argued to have been plundered, and so what are you going to do? Give it all back and shut the museum?
Maybe.
Well, the museum's not going to agree to that.
Well, I don't care.
You don't care.
I don't care. I don't care. Even if it was the Met in New York, I don't care. Give it back to the people who it should go to. So one group of people can take from another group of people, and
it's happened throughout human history.
Okay, but if we can repair that, shouldn't we?
Well, I mean, should we then, by that argument, North America should all be Native American land, and we should all give our houses back to the natives?
Well, we should 3D print them first. We should make 3D printed houses.
There's
That's
a plan.
What we should do. Yeah.
We should 3D print a replica of our country, and then we can give it back to we can give actual North America back to the natives, and then we can just live in the 3D printed version. I'm not sure how that would work, but anyways,
I'd be okay if they just did that to the Los Angeles area.
There you go. Okay, yeah.
In the meantime,
these are large and complicated questions, and it's not surprising to me that the British Museum is not chomping at the bit to give their collection back to from whence it came.
At least they should let them digitally scan it.
I agree. They should let. We should parse out the two issues here. One issue is digital scanning. The other issue is repatriation.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
I agree with digital scanning. I think repatriation is a complicated subject because basically every museum in England and the U.S. and Western Europe would basically be gutted by doing it.
Oh well.
Well.
And then everybody who wants to see the authentic things has to go to the country of origin.
Right, but having everybody go to the country of origin is not such a great thing because they're all taking flights to get there, and they're all spreading COVID to get there, and bringing COVID back.
And they're already going there in droves when there's no pandemic. I mean, have you been to Europe lately?
I've not been to Europe in years.
In 2019, before the pandemic hit, it was crowded.
Oh, sure, yeah.
People go.
You're right.
People go to Italy. They go to Greece. That's a crowded place.
Right, and people fly there, and that's not really a great thing for the world, for us all to be doing that. So really, we'd be much better off having a virtual Greece that we could all visit virtually. That would be a lot more carbon friendly. But
I know. I'd sure like to print my own copies of some of those Elgin marbles.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Anyway,
you could have the Cohen marbles.
The Cohen marbles. Speaking of printing, what's coming up on our show this week?
We're going to start out talking about lightweight extruder feeders.
And then we're going to discuss some of the posts about the Prusa XL that are appearing on Facebook.
And then we're going to question design quality.
I think we should get to it. So now that we need to replace the Zesty Nimbles, because I'm not just going to replace one, I'm yanking them all. Because if one's going to fail, they're all going to fail. So why bother? I'm just going to, the Zesty folks are going to send us replacement bodies for the V2s, and I'm just going to pack them all up and maybe put them on the market and sell them all because I'm probably not going to use them. I may try one on the belt printer, the CR30. We may play with that as an experiment, see how that works out.
Sure.
But,
well, it makes sense to try other things in the market. I mean, and report on them and see if they're better or worse or whatever.
So let's talk about some of them that we could be looking at.
Yep.
The first one that comes to mind for me is the E3D Hemera.
Okay.
And
so we're talking about alternatives to full-size, full-weight direct drive extruders.
Yeah. Well, the Hemera probably rates as a full-sized, full-weight direct drive extruder. Because
I thought it had a pancake stepper or something.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Okay.
And the 2 years ago or so, when they showed us the early beta units, I said, "Why are you going mid-size laminate stack on the NEMA stepper?"
Because they need to, presumably.
When you can go with the pancake, and I never got a reply from any of the engineers over there at E3D.
Pancake doesn't have enough torque.
That's exactly what it must have been, and they didn't want to admit it.
Well, I mean, we all know that.
But so now we've got the Hemera. Now we put the Hemera that we purchased onto my Ender 3, which is, one can say, a bit of a waste. You know, the Ender 3 is great as long as it's cheap. And the moment you start polishing that turd, man, maybe turd's too strong a word, but
yeah, I know a lot of people who are very happy with their Ender 3s, but
I like the fact that it's inexpensive, and the moment you start pouring money into it, it's like, why?
Yes, you're gilding a sow's ear.
Yeah, I could, you fix little things like the bed, make the bed more reliable, but you don't have to pour money into it.
Right.
And the Hemera's really pouring. I mean, the Hemera cost almost as much as the printer, for crying out loud. So,
and you're not going to get that much of a performance increase in it because you're still slinging the damn bed around.
Yeah. Now you're slinging a hunk of metal around too. So for the tool changer, a lot of folks who buy the E3D tool changer put on Hemeras, and I looked at how they were mounting them, and I was thinking, well, I could put the Hemera on one tool just to experiment with it, and then I saw just how they were mounted. And I didn't feel that was an appropriate design. I thought it looked like crap, to be honest.
That's sort of the default configuration, right? Because it's all from it's all the E3D.
Yeah,
line,
it's all E3D equipment, and so the mount itself puts the Hemera in a different angle that you would expect,
right?
Which in turn uses all the spare space between the tools, which makes the space between the tools very, very tight,
right?
Which shouldn't be a problem because things have to be precise when parking and unparking.
I mean, you're going to hit the parking spikes or not.
Right. Exactly.
And if you're off, it's not going to work either way.
Yeah. But it just seemed like a large hunk of metal to be slinging around something that's already overweight.
Right.
So, I decided not to do that. So I was going to look at the orbiter. Now the orbiter, which we did buy, and I did mount it. It's up. It's on there now. We're going to start experimenting with it and testing it, and we'll be doing that review as a separate segment. Now the orbiter uses the smaller NEMA stepper, the round kind, and we've gotten some feedback from folks that say there could be issues with that motor. That motor can burn out, but the person who developed the mount that I used, it's on Thingiverse. We could talk about that when we review the orbiter. He came back and said, hey, you lower the current and it works fine. And you don't get the heat, so you don't get heat creep, and you just go slightly less than what they say the current should be, and you get plenty of torque.
Wow.
The thing about the orbiter and the Hemera, by the way, is that these drives, unlike the Nimbles, are dual hobbed gear drives, which are extremely powerful for, holding the filament in place and getting precise movement. Unlike the Nimble or some of the older drives where you get a hobbed gear on one side and a flat bearing on the other side. They still work, but like the Bontex, which were one of the first ones to do this commercially for hobby printers, having the two toothed hobbed gears on each side is probably the optimal way to go. So the orbiter is the next thing we're going to look at. One person on the forum suggested the Sherpa.
I've never even heard of that one.
Now, unlike the orbiter uses planetary gearing to get its torque. The Sherpa uses a fairly significant tooth gear to a small tooth gear to get its torque. And it also uses a minimal body. The body itself uses minimal material, probably to make it inexpensive to SLS print it. And it also uses the small circular stepper motor. So one thing I've always wondered is why don't one of these guys come up with a way of driving the motor through a drive cable, like the Nimble and the Drive 3, the Flex 3 drive.
Yeah.
Why not do it that way? Well, probably because it's really not necessary. But in the meantime, the folks who played with the orbiter on the tool changer, they're showing me print speeds which are comparable to what I was doing with the Nimble. So we're going to try that one next. Let's see what else is out there. There is one other I would love to try. The Bondtech. There's a new Bondtech. It's they call it LGX, but it's an LGX Lite. It's smaller than the LGX, much, much lighter than the LGX. It just came out, but they're 8 weeks out for delivery. So I may put an order in and put it on later, but you won't be hearing about it for a couple of months. So these are some of the ones we're going to be playing with, and we may also contact the folks at Flex 3 Drive and get their drive cable thing, because it's way less expensive. It's way cheaper, and I won't need the drive cable, so I can save money there.
Are you sure they're using the same drive cable as the ones you've got?
Yeah, they may not, but it's a possibility. But even with the drive cable, it's, oh my gosh, it's almost half the price of the Zesty Nimble. And with the Flex 3 Drive, the casing itself does not have the same issues. And the casing itself is large enough to print yourself. So you can make replacements if things go out of tolerance.
Okay.
So we may look at that one too. If anybody else has any suggestions out there for others that we could look at for the tool changer, let us know.
Sure.
So now that we're in line for the Prusa XL, usually when it's time, when I put our hat in the ring of a new printer, I join the forums and I listened to the posts. I remember when the CR30 was coming and the iFactory was coming. I joined those two forums and I read the posts, and I was like, wow, some of these guys don't really have much experience. It was kind of hard not to be browbeating. And I remember we had a friend of ours who used to be on the forum. His handle was Jet Guy, and when questions came up like that, he would just rip into them, and it's hard not to feel like that from people who are total noobs but talk like they're experts.
Sure.
And so I go on the Prusa XL group, since we're now in line for the Prusa XL, and I kind of expected it, and I wasn't surprised. I got just what I expected: a bunch of Prusa users with Mendels. Who are making absurd assumptions about the XL.
Okay.
Okay, you want to hear about some of them?
Sure.
Okay, this one was interesting, and it has to do with speed. So there's a lot of discussion about how fast can you go? How fast can this new Core XY
How fast can a non-Mendel go?
Right. And so a lot of the posts were comments like the following: well, it's Core XY, so it should be as fast as my Voron. I should be able to go really fast. Right? And then there was one post, there was one after another where
Is it built on linear guides?
Actually, it is.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah.
But remember, it's a tool changer. So I had to burst their bubbles. So I go and I post, guys, this is a tool changer. And tool changers, by their very nature, have significant mass.
Oh, sure.
They have from two sources. Source number one is the tool changing mechanism in, you could call it the X carriage, because it's on a rail that's in the X axis.
Right.
Well, it's got a servo in there. And it's got all sorts of resources in there, probably the feed mechanism, the servo or stepper is in there. And then you have the tool. The tool itself is going to have a ton of mass. And compared to E3D, Prusa's designs are about twice the size of the E3D tool and carriage, which means it's going to be significantly heavier. And
that's because they're printing them all themselves.
Well, I don't know if these are plastic prints. It looks like there's a lot of metal in there.
Oh, okay, all right.
So it's more mass, and so that means it's probably going to be slower than the E3D tool changer. I mean, that's my expectation. And I had to, inform these guys of this, and then the posts just stopped.
Spoiled their fun.
Yeah, and then the other one was I posted. I said, "Gee, I sure hope that Prusa puts in the facilities for priming or purging and wiping." Shouldn't have used the term purge. I know purge has some negative connotations, and unfortunately, purge is used. The term is used for the pallet and the MMU, and for the pallet and the MMU, purge means you purge the previous material out.
Printing it onto a block.
By printing a block and get the new material into the nozzle.
Right.
And that's not what you're doing with the tool changer. So I mentioned this in a small post. I sure hope that Prusa understands we need to be able to wipe and prime. And I got this deluge of posts from the same kind of group of people going, it's tool changer. You don't need to do that.
How many of you ever used a tool changer?
None, obviously, nobody.
Even an IDEX or just a regular dual extruder, thing you learn about priming.
Even with an IDEX, IDEX it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You still have to prime and wipe your nozzle because it's parked and it's drooling, right? Now we've talked a lot about how I do it in the E3D, and it works brilliantly for the E3D. I get no drips 95% of the time. I'm good. I get good reliability. I'm protecting myself from drips. And the drips that do get
You're
through...
saying no drips on the print.
On the print, right. Something will drop onto the print and then become part of the print. Right. Those that do come in, they're not usually that bad and easy to trim off.
And not enough to cause a head crash.
But if you don't have that, what's your solution? Well, I'm hoping that it's not a purge block like the MMU. For Joseph could do that because he thinks, hey, it worked for the MMU. I'm just going to do it again. Well, if you do it again, remember, this thing's printing slow to begin with.
Right.
So any advantage in speed of print that you get from a tool changer, you've just nullified.
Sure. Well, and that's pointless because you don't need to purge, right? You just need to prime and wipe.
You're not purging.
So printing out a structure to do this on with every print is just a silly idea. You need a piece of hardware that scrubs the nozzle. You don't need to print a print that does it, because then you're just wasting all that time and all that material.
Yeah.
With every print.
So, the comments go flying back and forth, and folks are saying, you should look at the vid. The vid shows that it just puts it in pellets, and these guys were completely naive about it. So I tried to explain. I mean, and there's other things as well, but the Prusa XL, we should all expect it to be far from fully baked.
Well, every tool changer is like that at this point. I mean, it's just a new idea. Nobody's putting it all together.
But I'm holding Prusa research. They're selling it as a polished, completed product. So I'm going to review it as a polished, completed product.
Well, but you can have a product that's polished and completed, but still not optimal for your use cases.
Well,
you're very demanding.
I'm demanding because I look at all use cases, not just one specific. And the thing is, sometimes a specific use case, it's good enough. Who cares? But if you're doing all the use cases, maybe not. So we're going to find out. I would bet it's going to be about a year. It's going to take at least a year, because we're seeing supply issues everywhere.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
So the other day I'm walking through my shop and I'm looking at each of my printers. And, because of what happened with the Zesty Nimble, and I'm hoping this segment comes out after that discussion, I've been kind of a little bit mad, ranting in my head about stuff. And I'm noticing something that may be worthwhile discussing. Every printer I have in my garage and in my house has something about it that's not optimal.
Oh, guaranteed. Yeah.
But that's not the way it should be.
We're still a very young. We're talking about a very young technology.
Yeah.
It's a technology that how many years have we been doing the podcast?
That's a good question. Let me take a look, because I could probably
5 or 6
date
at least.
it. I could probably date it. Let's see, if I go into our database and go all the way to show number 1. February 13th, 2014.
2014. Okay, so 6 years? This is our 6th year we're starting on? Am I doing that right, or am I off
7 years.
So this is our 7th year we're starting on.
No, this is our 8th year
Our 8th year we're starting on.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm terrible at math. I'm
this
forever one off.
Yeah, this would be, we are going into
our 8th year. Okay.
Yeah.
Look at the automobile when it was 8 years old, right? It didn't even look like...
That's not...
Look at the personal computer when it was 8 years old.
No, that's not a fair... That's not a fair...
Well, I mean,
comparison.
yes, we are able to accelerate the product development, cycle much more than we were back then.
No,
but still, we're still early days on these things.
Let's go through some of these things that I saw, because I don't think that's correct. And I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of the things that I found on each of these 3D printers were fixed.
Sure, by you,
by me,
right.
and or by me from designs from others.
Yeah.
So let's start with the Rep 2.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that thing was craptastic.
Sure,
it was terrible.
Well, the hot end was a nightmare coming out of the factory.
But it was, and when it first came out, it wasn't as good as the Rep 1.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But the big problem with the Rep 2 was this absurd design of the method of extrusion. The feeding mechanism was absurd. It just didn't make any sense at all. They put this plastic cylinder pressing up against the filament,
right,
which has friction.
Right. So instead of having a roller as their idler bearing, they just had a static piece of slippery UHMW or something.
It didn't make sense. It was completely absurd. And we're all wondering, gee, why doesn't it work? Well, we all took it apart and we found out why.
Yeah.
And so certain individuals took it upon themselves to redesign it.
Sure.
And we all fixed it. But, let's move forward quite a bit. Race 3D.
Mm-hmm.
Race 3D they copied the Ultimaker style of toolpath control.
Mm-hmm.
And then they stuck on their extruder this big hunk of aluminum, this giant hunk of aluminum with 2 mid-sized stepper motors bolted onto the carriage, the XY carriage, thinking that would be okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not okay. It weighs a ton. Where's your engineer? What were you thinking? And then the bed. The bed came. It was supposedly pre-leveled, and you never need to level it.
Mm-hmm.
That's absurd.
Right.
It's
just asking for trouble.
Yeah, the heat makes the bolts, move, and eventually, within a week or so of printing, you're going to be out of level.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to level it, you had to, I think there was something like 10 screws or 12 screws that you had to get to underneath.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy. What are these guys thinking? What you needed to do was put 4 bolts in there with springs, and then you can adjust it.
Right, and have the bed be rigid such that it could be adjusted with just 3 or 4 points.
It's design decisions based on complete ignorance. Complete ignorance and hubris.
Well, but was it? I mean, I remember the printer bots that you and I built.
Yes,
where they had a bed that was non-levelable, and their notion was that they had this height probe, and it was one of the first printers that did Z height correction to correct for a unlevel bed, and they sort of thought that was the selling point on the printer, and that was the way forward. And it was
horrendous.
It was horrendous. You could get it to work, but it was way, way, way more complicated and less reliable than just leveling the bed manually.
Yeah.
On other printers.
It's easier to just simply level the bed.
Well, not on that one. It was impossible to level the bed. But on there, I had other printers at the time that I did not have those problems with.
Yeah.
But is it that the market sort of requires innovation or sort of has this demand, this drive for innovation in the market that brings us these sort of half-baked new ideas? Whereas if you put together a printer which was just dead nuts reliable with all of the optimal configurations, but didn't have anything really super flashy, would that sell?
Well, if you're out there and you know of a company that has this, you tell me.
Okay.
But I've yet to see a ready-to-print out of the box. That's an important factor.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the box printer where there is no bonehead compromise.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of them have a compromise based on stupidity, pure stupidity. I don't care how bad that sounds. Basically, they made a decision, and that decision was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I've yet to see that. Now, of course, if you're going to build your own 3D printer, hopefully you've got some experience.
Right.
Because you could make this mistake if you don't know anything about 3D printing and you're going to build one. But assuming that you have one and you're going to build one, which is a good idea. Have one first. Chicken and egg problem there, I guess. Anyway, you will design in optimization. You will know from your experience and your use cases what will work for you. Ideally, hopefully, you'll do that. But there are manufacturers out there that just don't think that way. And I have yet to see a printer out there. I know there's one guy out there named Joe who's going to say, oh, yeah, FlashForge, man. FlashForge does it. I don't know about that.
Mine sure as hell didn't.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about the new FlashForge.
Oh, the new Flash. Well, I don't have a new FlashForge.
Yeah,
so.
well, we don't have one, so we can't say. But from what I'm looking at them, well, I think there's performance compromises.
Oh, yeah, there always are. Yeah,
as well as durability compromises.
Right, yeah. See, I think you come from the world of aerospace, where everything got tested a gazillion times before it got sent out the door, and everything was optimized, because if it wasn't, someone was going to die.
Well, you know what you get when you
the world 3D printing is just not like that.
When you design a 3D printer from that perspective, you know what you get?
Yeah, you
get a Mark Forged.
Right.
You get a $75,000 Mark Forged.
Right. Yeah. So a $75,000 FDM machine.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, good luck selling those.
That prints carbon infused, carbon included threads and measures everything all the time and gets it perfect. No bed leveling. No worry about a clog. We'll see.
Yeah, sure, but you're not going to sell very many of those compared to the number of Ender 3s you're going to sell for $250. I mean, come on.
Hey, you know what? I'd be happy if they took the same approach with a 3D printer as they do with a bandsaw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you still need to level the bed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you still need to maintain it. You still need to tune it.
Right.
Just make access and the method of doing those things manageable. For example, you don't put you don't make it impossible to reach the tuning knob.
Mm-hmm.
You don't make it impossible to see things while you're tuning or adjusting. You don't put firmware in there that doesn't allow you to make changes to the firmware easily. It should be easy to make a change to the firmware. I don't know. I've yet to see an optimal, at least to the degree of a shop tool design. I'm not saying consumer product.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. To do it as a consumer product, like say your iPhone, no, that's absurd. It's a tool.
Right.
But it could be a lot better. Could be a lot better.
The shop tools are mechanically much, much simpler than 3D printers.
Yeah.
And they're all more or less copies off of some previously existing design.
Bingo. That's exactly what 3D printers are.
Right. But there's no, other than like the saw stop, there hasn't really been an innovation in big power tools in 30 or 40 years, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, so yet they still sell them. It's just not, it's not like, oh, we have this fancy new, whatever that solves some problem that you had, because there aren't that many problems to solve anymore.
Yeah.
So now they're competing on price and availability. So
let's see what the Prusa XL is.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Oh boy, Whitney, another show written to the hard drive, waiting for encoding, uploading, and commitment on our feed. To all of our very supportive listeners, thank you all out there for your support on Patreon. Thank you for your positive reviews. We really do appreciate those, along with the write-ups. Those really motivate us. Thank you. And hey, thanks for listening. We do it for you. We do it for fun. Still no advertising. We are turning advertisers down. I mean, if I was going to pick an advertiser, it would have to be for some heavy coin. I mean, I'm not going to, if you're out there with like a new plate that you want to sell, we'll talk about it. If you want to send us one, we can review it for you. Advertising, but on the other hand, if you're like 3D Systems or Stratasys,
there you
or
go.
maybe HP,
yeah.
No, I can be convinced for the right amount of money. So I think that'll work.
Well, we'll see.
Think that's going to work.
I wouldn't feel bad about flogging any one of those companies, at least, because they all make quality machines.
Yeah, they do. Anyway, if you've got a tip, a question, or a candidate thing of the week, send us an email.
Send it to info@3dprintingtoday.com. That's THREE, the letter D, printingtoday.com.
And I jumped ahead of myself. I didn't mention the thing of the week.
Thing of the week.
So this week, I've got the thing of the week. It's the wireless phone charger vertical dock that comes to us by a Thingiverse user whose handle is Sizop.
And Sizop tells us that their name is Doesn't Matter.
Okay, doesn't.
So Mr. or Ms. Matter, thank you for your contributions.
Yes. Now, what this thing is actually a phone dock.
Can I call you Doesn't?
Doesn't? Or,
Are we on a first name basis? Maybe
Ms.
Does.
Matter, Mr. Matter.
Does he? Does. Yeah, okay. Anyways.
Better than antimatter. Get them together.
Oh, that wouldn't be good.
Anyway, this phone dock is made for those who use a phone that has an inductive charger, which is quite handy because you just place it into the dock and you don't have to plug it into anything. Mm-hmm. And I've got a phone that does that, and it just happens to fit the standard disc size, which is about 100 millimeters in diameter. And the cable goes through the center. It's easy to print. And we're going to use this in a segment discussing variable layer heights as an example of how the variable layer height controls in Prusa Slicer work. But it's an easy print. You don't need to use any supports. Printed the first time fairly well in PLA. A really useful object.
And you can have your phone standing up so you can use it as a clock while it charges.
Yeah. Just drop it in and it charges. That's thing number 5269167. 5269167 on Thingiverse. So let's see, I already mentioned the email. If you're interested in our Google group, just do a search in Google for 3D printing tips and tricks. Don't use the word thing. 3D printing tips and tricks. And if you want to post, you have to hit that join button and give them an email. And we still support our Facebook group. But folks out there, if you're listening and you're a Facebook user, we really would appreciate it if you went to the Google group. The Facebook group is kind of hard to use. It's hard to thread. It's hard to manage. And I don't like going on Facebook. So if you're looking for support, if you're looking for opinions, if you're looking for the things that are related to what we're talking about and some photographs, I highly recommend go to the Google group. Let's see. We do have a show next week. Show number 428.
Let's see. We start out talking about hybrid kits.
We discuss more on gaming.
And then we work on getting the first layer right.
I think that's it.
Great. Thanks for listening.